This clock is displaying 1,440 hours. Anybody know how long that is?
3 months.
2 months.
2 months.
Fuck me.
Neff, I don't know what you're worse at, math or calling people back. Anyway, the clock is telling you officially how much money we have left,
Okay, but we've got 10 months to pay you back, right?
9 months.
Jesus Christ.
which leaves a gap of
7
7.
months. Okay. So?
computer. Say it a different way.
We have an option in the deal. If the business starts to bleed profusely, we're allowed to act.
Act. So what does that mean?
It's just a tourniquet, buddy. When that clock shows 0, this restaurant needs to cease operations.
Welcome to the Eat Your Content podcast. I'm your host, Rich Herrera. This is your podcast for all things food and pop culture. Thank you for pushing play. Just a reminder to follow me on socials at Rich Herrera and at Eat Your Content to keep up with everything going on with the podcast, and also to make sure you like and subscribe anywhere you get your podcast and on YouTube, so you know when new episodes drop. Hit that like and subscribe and the bell button. And if you like what we're doing here, leave a review. I'd appreciate that. On this episode, I am so thrilled to be talking to Kasey Anton. She literally wrote the book on kitchen and finances. And you're kind of wondering, like, Rich, you're a pop culture podcast. What are you doing talking about business and the operational side, the not fun side of restaurants? As many of you know, I have done episodic recaps of The Bear, and I sent Kasey a clip of this bear of the bear episode in the recent season where computer and Uncle Jimmy come in with a clock. It's got 1,440 minutes on there, and it represents how much time is left in that restaurant in terms of money before they have to shut things down. And I thought, I want to talk about that. And I found Kasey's profile, and she was kind enough to jump onto the pod and talk about kind of the nitty gritty things of running a restaurant. So Kasey, thank you so much for coming on the pod and taking the time out.
I am very happy to be here, even though when you sent me that clip, I did have PTSD over that. I remember feeling like this hole of dread, like, oh no, I know exactly where the scene is going. And I hadn't even watched the show. I just knew where it was going to go based on, the content of that scene, which was very relevant to what I do day in and day out.
Yeah, let's talk about one thing that a lot of people say about The Bear and what you just said is that it's too real. It's very
Mhm.
real. I have a lot of friends in the service industry that, like you, couldn't make it through because it just brought up a lot of things, right? But looking at that clip, how realistic was it in terms of how a restaurant operates and the slim margins that restaurants have? When you watched it, were you looking at it and being like, "Wow, that's pretty good."
Oh yeah, it's spot on. I mean, I think I probably would have approached it a little bit differently if the bear was my client, but close to that. It was spot on. It is something that I see and talk about constantly. It can be the elephant in the room. It's very, very real, and I'm so glad that you said that you've had other friends in the industry that had the same reaction to the show in general and had to kind of stop watching it. I watched the first season entirely and I was like, oh, this is my jam. These are my people. Oh my God, I feel at home. And then something, I don't know if it was the show or me, turned, and by halfway through the second season, I'm like, I don't feel so good. And it was just because it was bringing up so many of the things that had happened in my 25 years in the restaurant industry that I'm like, I don't know if I want to go back there right now. I forgot how hard it was. It was hard. So that clip though is just very relevant to what I do now when working with the financials and cash flow of a restaurant. I mean, it was spot on in how just because people are coming in the door and there's money dropping in the account every night doesn't mean you have a successful business. Sometimes the last thing you need is more sales. Sometimes every sale you make means you're digging a deeper hole. So it was very relevant. It was spot on. It was a great scene.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit before we dig into that scene deep. Let's talk a little bit about your background and maybe kind of why it brought up so many feelings. It's because you were in the restaurant industry. You weren't always a business consultant
Yeah.
helping restaurants become profitable. You were in the kitchen. So tell me a little bit about your background, how that started, and what was the turning point for you that made you say, I think I want to go on this side of the house of the restaurant business.
Yeah, that's an easy story. I spent my entire first half of my life working in restaurants. That's all I ever wanted to do since the age of 6 years old. Even though it was not in my family and in my extended family, nobody worked in restaurants. I just was fascinated by them and I loved them, and that's all I wanted to do. But my parents were like, "What? Like, are you nuts?" Like, no. Like, my mom's a nurse. My dad worked for a telephone company. They're just like, "You're not going to go to college." I wanted to go to, hospitality school. No, you're not going to do that. Too narrow degree. You don't want to go in restaurants. It's hard. It's grueling. It's no way to live. Like, fine, okay, because they helped me pay for college. So I just went to URI and I got a communications degree. But the day I graduated and all the way through, I got a job in restaurants. That's what I was going to do. It really was my calling. That's what it was. So, from the time I graduated, I mean, the time I was 13, I started working in restaurants, but then by the time I graduated college, I had worked in every single position and then throughout my 20s in every single type of restaurant, from the mall, the kiosk, to family run, to fine dining, to corporate. And then I've worked in every single position. And that was really interesting because I eventually went on to work at the Chart House, and I don't know if you've ever heard of the Chart
Oh yeah.
House.
Yep.
Okay,
Yep.
so it was once a big chain. Now they still exist, but very few. But I was working there toward the end of their heyday, and man, that was the job to have. I mean, talk about culture. They had it coming out the seams of that place. It was amazing. But back then they had the premier restaurant management training program. It was called CHAMP, Chart House Administrative Management Training Program. It was huge, and you had to apply to get in. You're lucky if you get accepted, and then they might, once you're accepted, they'll move you to one of their tropical locations. Like, all their locations were either like in Aspen, Colorado, where they started, or in Hawaii, or just like in these beautiful locations. And of course I got moved to Boston, which I was already in Newport, Rhode Island anyway. So I got moved to Boston and I started there. But their program makes you work double shifts, and you go from prep cook, receiver, dishwasher, valet, like, you do everything right up until manager. So I learned so many things, and then eventually found my way through the streets of Boston to these little boutique restaurants. This is a whole new world. I'd only known really kind of corporate until then. And I was like, I love these little boutique restaurants opening up. So from there, I started working in those places, met some partners, got some money together, and we opened our first restaurant in Boston in 1999 called Bomboa, and opened another one since then. And those were the best of times, and those were the worst of times. That is the best way. And I write about it in the beginning of my book to kind of, well, really to grab the reader, so that for me to be able to say, I know you, I've been there. I feel it. Because we thought we were living life high on the hog. Maybe we were, but we weren't really careful. And then on the other end of it, I learned how to stretch a dollar, really. Like, I had to get really good at the numbers, Rich, like really fast, in order to be able to keep my restaurant open long enough so that I'd be able to sell it versus just have to shut it down, or God forbid file chapter 11. So I just got really, really good at numbers, understanding financials, and just following the money. So cash flow. I became an expert at it because I had to just survive. So then by the time I got to kind of the end of that lifespan, it was around 2006. It was the same year I got married, had my first kid. My partners were going in other directions, and it was just, it was a new chapter. It was okay, it's time to sell. We're all going to move on. I thought I'd just be a stay-at-home mom, and then that lasted like 4 seconds. It was like that was the hardest job I have ever had in my life. The hardest job by far. I couldn't just I was gonna go insane. So I'm like, well, what can I do now? Like, I can't go back into the restaurant industry the way I had been in it, working, 12, 14-hour days, 6 days a week with an infant. So I'm like, all right, well, what's my skill set? I've just done restaurants my whole life. What's my skill set? And so when I had to take an inventory of what I had, I'm like, oh, all right, well, I got good at math and numbers, and let me see if I can help some other restaurants at the time, like, figure out their numbers and their cash flow. So I called up some chefs that I knew were opening places, and they're like, yep. So got a couple of clients that way, and then they eventually referred me to other people. Like, oh, my girlfriend's an interior designer. She sucks at money, like, sucks. Like, can you help her? And I met with her. I'm like, I don't know anything about design, but let me meet with her. Sure enough, 2 + 2 = 4 over there. It's the same number, same math. Yep, I can help her. And then she referred me. And from there, my new business just literally exploded. And I had found out that every small business needed the skill set that I had because all of them, by all, I mean like 99.99999% suck at money. And it's literally the most important thing in your business. So that's why Spark grew so fast. And I work primarily with restaurants, but a few other industries as well.
Yeah, so you have your consulting business, Spark Business Consulting, and then you literally wrote the book,
Yeah.
Profit First for Restaurants.
Yeah.
That was your niche, but like you said, small business, whether it's a restaurant or anything, you have to deal with the same profit and loss and margins.
Yeah.
But what is it about restaurants that make the numbers just a little bit different than saying opening up a boutique clothing store? Like what is it that restaurants have to deal with a little bit differently than say your normal small business?
I mean, a lot of things, but the first thing that comes to mind when you ask that question is just compared to all the other businesses out there, restaurants are like a living, breathing thing. It's like a heartbeat and breath. Like it doesn't stop. Even if the restaurant closes, it's like there's always something happening in a restaurant. It's just constantly moving. And it's a lot to take care of. It's a lot to wrap your arms around. It's a lot to control versus a retail store, which is somewhat similar, but it's different when you shut the lights off and lock a door in a retail store. I feel like it goes quiet, it goes dark. A restaurant doesn't. There's just an energy and a heartbeat there that I've never seen in any other industry. And believe me, I've worked in all of them by now. So for restaurants, I think that's one thing. It's constant, so that's a lot for anyone. The margins are clearly very slim. For most, I mean, really most, not all. And I am lucky enough that I work with a couple of restaurants where margins are not a problem, and it's just so delicious and amazing to see. But those are the exceptions that make the rule. Overall, it's very difficult to be profitable in a restaurant. It rarely happens by luck, it happens by intention, but a typical restaurant owner is doing so many things, wearing so many hats, putting out so many fires that they don't have the wherewithal to put the intention behind the dollar that it needs. So it's a literal, pardon my French, shit show that happens. And that's what gets them into these holes of debt, which is what that scene that you sent me from the bear was a lot about that. Because I could see them just going back to that scene because I'm picturing it in my head. I could see, the workers in the restaurant were kind of like, "Oh, is that good that we have that much time?" Like, oh, like they weren't really alarmed because from their perspective, they're seeing customers come in the door, the phone's ringing with reservations, and so that's like money coming in. But the accountants or the financiers, like on my side of the table, were like, it's it's not enough. Like that's not even close to being enough. Like we're upside down. Something's wrong here. Something needs to be fixed. So this is what I deal with all the time. So I think that's why it hit home so bad. And it's just a common thing for restaurants because you literally have to latch on to every dollar that comes in and know where it's going to go and try and keep as much of it as you possibly can.
Yeah, let's go back to that scene in The Bear. The 1,440 hours represented the amount of money they currently had, which is their what they called their parachute. Uh, Before, if that clock hit zero and they're not making a profit, they've got to shut down.
Mhm.
Um, if you were in the kitchen on computer and Jimmy's side of the table, consulting, and it's kind of a comical thing where Carmi's bad at math. That was pretty funny at the
It
beginning of the
was
clip.
hilarious, by the
Hilarious.
way.
And that's pretty true to form, right? You have the creative that
Yes,
concentrates on the
100%.
plates, that's horrible at business, and then you have the business person kind of bringing them back down to reality. If you were in the room with them consulting, okay, here's what you need to do to be profitable before that clock hits zero, what would you have told Carmi and the team?
So I understand why Carmi and the team did not understand heavily the point they were trying to make. So I feel like there's a couple of different ways I might approach it. There's one thing I've been doing recently. I've been just this month or in October, I was traveling around speaking at the different restaurant associations. So I was in New York and then I did a couple in Massachusetts. And I started doing this thing with cash, right? So I would come with $127 in cash in different like ones, fives, tens, twenties. And it was $127, like I said. And so this is where I think really got people because a lot of people came up in the audience, came up to me after and said, "Oh, that made sense." So the 127, it represented a couple coming into your restaurant and spending $100. Then they have a $7 meals tax in the state of Massachusetts. $7 is the sales or slash meals tax, and they left a $20 tip. So that's what my 127 in cash represented. And that is generally what will drop into a business bank account for a restaurant, that 127. So I started with that. I said, but if they paid by credit card, and they probably did, you got to pay the credit card fee. What's that? And people are like, oh, it could be $3 or $4. Okay. Let me put that aside, because you don't even get that money. It goes to them. We put that aside. All right. The $7 goes to the state. That's not your money. We can't play with that. Let's move that to the side. $20 goes to your server and their paycheck, or however you pay tips. But not your money. Put that aside. So now we're left with $96. And they're like, yeah, okay, I get it. I said, all right. So then, what do you want of food costs? And that's kind of a big issue with a lot of restaurants now. Like, oh, like 35, 36%. Okay. I count out $35. I put that off to the side. All right. What are we running in labor? Oh, like, so 38, 40% right now. Yeah. Okay. I count that out. I put it aside. All right. Let's talk about your occupancy, your rent, your insurances. And yep, that's what okay. And I just started putting all that money out. And sure enough, people were still yelling expenses, and I had no money left. But there were expenses that need to be paid, but there's no money left. I said, okay, where I have no money, but you're paying these things. And everyone's like, yeah, I'm paying them. Okay, where's it coming from? And then it's kind of silent. Like, I don't know. Like, where is it? You're paying them, but I have no cash. Where's it coming from? It's coming from debt. So then I pull up this piece of paper with a big red marker. I'm like, this is where it comes. Debt is funded. It's funded by something. It's funded by your loss. And every time, if that's your model, you're running a 35% food cost and a 38 or 40% labor, and your OPEX is like another 36%. We're out of money. We're out of money, and we still have to pay this. So now we got more debt. So it's just like, it's a good visual, I think, to kind of get them to understand is like, okay, your costs aren't in line. That's why you're not profitable, but you're still open. You're still selling. So every time you sell something, we're going more into debt, and we're going more into debt, and we're going more into debt until you fix the model. So I think with that scene, I probably would have gotten a little bit more granular. Why aren't they profitable? I didn't say it in that scene. I'm sure that was later on or earlier maybe. But okay, if you want to be profitable, we need to cut that food cost down to 28%. And then we just save some money, cut payroll down to maybe 34%. Okay, is that enough? Where else can we look for savings? It's normally going to be in your prime costs. So it would just be a visual like that, meeting them where they are and talking to them about a typical check average, a couple that comes in, this is what they normally spend, here's where the money goes. If we can think in that granular of terms, I think you can really get people to understand.
One thing that they showed earlier in the season that's not in that clip is what part of the thing that was draining them of money is Carmi was changing the menu every single day. Like every
Yes.
single day was a different menu. Is that advisable? Like when I
Oh,
watched it as a consumer, I'm like, that doesn't seem like a good idea.
I think that could be the reason why I stopped watching. It is the worst idea. I feel sick. I think that if they were my client and he told me that, I think it would be the first time in the history of my life that I would walk out on somebody for that reason. Because the only world in which that model works is if A, when he does his food ordering and everything comes in, he uses every single scrap of it. There's nothing left over, there's no waste, and it gets sold, which is almost impossible to do and predict. So to be sold, it has to be sold at a profit margin that makes sense for the model. Then the labor has to make sense. So I'm guessing that would be, the very skilled Carmi doing all of the work with maybe half a person next to him to be able to do that. And then they'd have to guarantee that they would sell the seats. I mean, you'd have to be so precise, almost nearly impossible in that business model for it to make sense and make money. And then there'd be burnout on top of it, like the burnout of people, because you'd be working them to the bone to have to re-gear their brains every day to something new. Like, oh,
And
no,
and
no.
that's that balance of artistry versus business, right? Carmi's
Yeah,
the artist.
that's an
He
extreme, but yeah.
he wants to put the best food on a plate no matter the cost, and then you have his sister Sugar saying, "You can't do that." They finally, you know, got it together, and he was doing repeats, which was a
Yeah.
huge thing for him, to
Mm-hmm.
have to repeat menu items, but it
Mm-hmm.
stabilized their food costs.
Yeah.
And it made things predictable for customers and things like that. There's
Yep.
this other show I was watching called Knife Edge. It's a docu series where they document restaurants chasing Michelin stars. Uh,
Oh, I've heard of this. Yep.
yeah, and they're saying that if you get one Michelin star, you'll increase your business by 20%. You get 2 stars, it's 40%. You get 3 stars, it's 100%. You will gain that much more business if you. So they show these restaurants trying to earn these stars, and the perfect example of this art versus commerce thing was this husband and wife team. I can't remember the name of the restaurant, but he had this like sunflower based dessert, but they were also having a shortage at the front of the house. They needed more help. And they're like, well, where are we going to get the money? We got to do something to free up some money. And the wife was the business minded one. She said, your sunflower dessert, you use an entire sunflower head per person to help to plate the dessert. That's
Mm-hmm.
$25,000 a year just in sunflower heads that nobody eats, that nobody uses, that we just throw away. Let's get rid of that. You can do the same dessert. It'll taste just as fine. You don't have that sunflower head as a presentation. And the husband was fighting her on that. Said,
Oh
"No,
my
that's not what I
goodness.
envisioned. That's not the vision of my dessert." And eventually the money was louder.
Yeah.
So when you see situations like that, have you ever walked into a restaurant during your consulting and kind of seeing that art versus commerce come into play when you make a suggestion? It's like, hey, I think it's best that you do this, but the restaurant's like, I don't want to do that. And how does that get resolved?
Oh, constantly. I mean, and at that level, when you're working with a creative and a chef for life type person, my chef at my restaurant was very much like that. Oh, and the chef before that, before I opened my restaurant, we all worked together at a restaurant called La Bettola, and it had won a lot of awards. I probably would have got a Michelin star. And the chef was, I think he's now in Asia, but he like won like Bon Appetit, Food and Wine Top 10 chefs. Like he won a lot of things, but he was that chef. He would design these menus and put these exotic like turtles, like weird ingredients on the thing, and he would just throw this is probably where I get my business acumen from. He would just throw a number. He would handwrite every menu, by the way. He had beautiful penmanship. It was very cool. And he'd put it right on his parchment paper. And he'd write it and he would just throw a number on it, whatever like looked good. Oh, a 7 looks good here. Like without actually like paying attention to the food cost. And sometimes it worked out okay for what I knew at the time. But sometimes I'd be like, why are we only charging like $17 for this like thing that came in at $100 a pound or whatever it was? And he'd be like, oh no, no, like that's fine. It is. We're making lots of money off that because I filleted it and it's only this. And he would do some weird chef math. And like there is this thing called chef math, and it makes no, it's not math at all. Actually, I don't know what it is. It just he would come up with this random number, but honestly, I think he convinced himself of it. He thought for sure he was right, but I would have like the vendor invoice and the price per pound, and then I'd watch it be like prepped, and I'm like, no, that's not what that adds up to. Like, we just lost money on this dish. It cost us, $15. You're charging 17. Like, what are we gonna do with $2? So he was a difficult one to deal with, but he was extremely talented, and I think for him, and maybe that's just to him, like, he would fight me that day, but the next day, I know something stayed in his head because it would be a different. He would go out of his way to create something that literally was like chicken broth in a bowl, and he would charge like $21 for it. Like, I'm not kidding. Like, you go out of his way. I'm like, oh, that's good. Like, I like that. So, I mean, every creative is so different, but I think the most important thing is just to meet them where they are, try and see it through their point of view, and then, shift them to reality.
Yeah, yeah. What's your greatest success story in the restaurant world of turning a business around that maybe they got in for the right reasons? They love to cook, they love making people happy, but when they saw the numbers, are like questioning every life decision they ever made, and then you get in there and help them through it. Can you name a story or tell me a story about one of a great turnaround in your consulting?
This is a good question. All right, I'm Rolodexing all of the restaurants. I think we work with like 68 right now. Oh God, there's so many. I'm gonna go with the first one that comes to mind. I don't know if it's the greatest one, but it is a really good one. And it is a Hawaiian, not themed, but Hawaiian food out of California. They do Hawaiian cuisine, Callie's Kitchen. And she it's, by the way, Rich, it's always the female owners. By the way, it really is. I just think that they listen, like they listen there and they understand. They're like, okay, and then they do what we say. Hey, if you do this, this will happen, and they do it, and then it's like, oh my God, the magic happened. I think it's a little bit tougher with a lot of the male chefs and male owners I work with. It can happen, but so she came to us right after I wrote the book. She was probably one of the first people to hear or get it because she's like, I'm doing this. This is what I want. And so she was your typical restaurant owner, like the one that does that, which has one bank account, all the money comes in, and then you grab fistfuls and you pay whoever's screaming the loudest, whoever's ringing your phone off the hook, and then you're throwing it at payroll. Oh, I got to cover payroll. What's left? Oh yeah, he's pissed. Let me pay him. Like that's what I did at the time when I had my restaurants. What everybody does, right? They're just covering their sins with cash and then closing their eyes. And then they wait till Saturday rolls around. Like, okay, there's more money. All right, let's do it again. Let's do it again. And hopefully someday there'll be more money left over and not as many people screaming. It's kind of like this. This is like the cycle that I see day in and day out all the time. So in the book, I describe a different way to go. Just simply, let's be intentional with every dollar. And we're going to do that using bank accounts that we're going to nickname, and we're going to separate the money like the envelope system. It's very simple, maybe not that easy. It's simple. So she did it. And then she came to work with us too, but she kind of did it on her own. And then we helped fine tune it. So now, I mean, they were going from about break even, a little bit better than that, but like not paying themselves that great, but like scraping by. I'd say they were scraping by. They weren't like my worst horror story. I have others of those. They were scraping by. That as soon as we put this system in place and it like literally puts guardrails up around your money, and when you do that, you start operating differently. You know where to focus your time more because the money needs to be there. It's just they've changed it so much. They did a complete 180 where they're now wildly profitable. All of their costs are in line, if not better than they ever dreamed of. They've expanded. They're on the news out there. They've got like lines out the door. I mean, that is literally like a rags to riches story for a small little restaurant that really turned it around just from following the system and being intentional with money. And she's great. And she's like our number one ambassador. So she like goes out in California and speaks about like the book pretty much. She's like, this is amazing. It changed my life. So that's a big one. I think another one I just want to mention, which is not like necessarily, it's not necessarily like well, it is a happy ending, but it's not the happy ending that everyone wants. I write about it in the book, about the Burger Shack in Indiana by Notre Dame University. And I changed the name in the book. It's not there anymore, thank God. But I mean, it was a story when he came to us. He loved his business so much and just couldn't understand like why it wouldn't work, and just wanted it to work. And could we help him make it work? And at first, we're like, "All right, sure, but let's get into your books." And then we get into his books, and the books are an absolute mess, like an absolute mess, like one of the biggest messes. They didn't make any sense. They were crazy. So as he's chugging along operating this Burger Shack and we're starting to clean up the books and then the picture is starting to emerge, this place was losing money hand over fist. Turn and look at his balance sheet. He had every loan from every mafia member, Tom, Dick, and Harry. Like
Oh
you
no.
can imagine, he was so far in debt. And the reason why is when we finally got to the bottom of the pile and like had the clear picture, I forget the exact amount, but let's say he was selling burgers for $7.50. It was in a college town. They were costing him close to $6 with
Oh man.
everything, with what it came with. Every time he sold a burger, he was losing his shirt because you not only have the cost of everything, the tissue paper, the paper, everything, you had your payroll, you had your overhead, you had all these other things. That's why he never had money and just kept borrowing. He put up his house. I mean, he did everything and he just couldn't figure it out. And so in that way, I felt like we were a little bit of the angel on the shoulder because I had to just tap him and say, no, time out, man. This isn't gonna work. Even if we stop today, you're almost $600,000 in debt. at a little
Whoa.
30-seat restaurant. In order for us to pay that back, we have to be this much profitable. To get this much profitable, you're gonna have to start selling burgers for like 38 bucks and hope you're packed every night. Like we just backed into the numbers to say this is what has to happen in order to solve for this. And that was on, that was never gonna happen. He'd said that. I'm like, "Okay, I know it's never gonna happen. But if you don't close now, that 600,000 is going to be 650,000 in the next 3 months. Then it's going to be 700,000. And then it's going to be like the music has to stop at some point. And that's the hardest thing that I have to do. But it is one that I find it's so important because when I finally brought him to the table and got him to really understand like how rare and how not rare, but how grave the situation was, and he made the difficult decision. He went on to be like a health coach, living his best life, happier than ever, light as a feather, like kind of I was when I got rid of my restaurants too, because there was so much. You feel light as a feather, and you're like, wow, I should have done that years ago. And you know what? For him, he should have. That's not everyone's story, but at some point, the music does stop, and you kind of have to know who's going to be left holding the bag.
So let's say, I have restaurateurs and maybe a budding restaurateur listening to this right now. What's the one financial habit or thing that they need to go into before they even think about opening a restaurant? What do they need to do to get themselves in the best place for success before they open the doors?
Yeah, that's great. First of all, I mean, I'm gonna sound like your typical professor, but you need a business plan. And I'm not talking about you need some like 180 page like tome book that nobody wants to read. You can do that. I'm not saying that. I'm like the business plan is on one piece of paper. It could be on a cocktail napkin. What's your plan to make money? That's what needs to happen. So you need to figure out about how many people are going to walk in the door. And yes, you should know that. Not exactly, but you should have a good idea. How many people are going to walk in the door on your average night? What are they going to buy? Thus, like what's your check average going to be? What's that going to cost you? That's your food beverage cost. Who do you need in the building to help you sell and create a great experience? That's your labor. What's your overhead? What's it take to keep the lights on? And what's your insurance going to be? And think about all the other things that are line item for restaurants. And there's lots of them. Your point of sale, your marketing, like there's like a million things. Keep in mind your merchant costs, which are always getting up there. Plug all those in, figure out what that number at the top has to be in order to cover all of those costs, and then how many people need to come in the door in order to be profitable, not break even. Break even means a loss. If you're breaking even, you're going to lose money because a restaurant can't survive without profit. So it doesn't have to be a lot of profit, it just has to be some. So figure that out. That's the first thing is on a napkin, just write like, okay, I think I'm going to do this many, this much in sales, and here are what my cost's going to be, and here's what the overhead looks like, and here's my 5 or 10% bottom line. And if that number at the top looks doable, if you're like, yeah, 25 people come in tonight, I can do that. Okay, sweet, cool. If it says you need 150 people to come in every night and you're like in a backwater town, that might not work for you. So be comfortable, have the stomach to know like, yeah, that's the number. That makes sense and I can back that up. So I'd start there, have that little model, it's just like 6 lines of numbers, and then once you open, go back to that model and see where you went off if you did go off. And that's where you fix it. That's where that Burger Shack could have fixed it. He literally in his head, he thought he was running a 30% food cost on those burgers because I think he heard the number somewhere and it sounded good. He just assumed it was. And when I showed him it was like 78% and not 30%, it changed everything. He just didn't know. So it's important to know your numbers, but it's important to see your original model and then keep track of what your actual model is to see where it goes off and if you need to adjust. And here's the thing, here's the last thing I'll say about that. If you do that and then you're open for a couple of months, maybe 6, 7, 8 months, and you're losing money, for example, if you're losing money and you're losing your shirt and you don't see a way to get it back on track, well, now hopefully by then you didn't incur too much debt. The model doesn't work. Maybe it's the location that didn't work. Maybe something didn't work. And for me, I would change something drastic, whether close or move or something. I wouldn't just like put my head in the sand and keep grinding it out, hoping things are going to change because that's not a strategy. That's literally like hope and a prayer. And that costs a lot of money in the restaurant industry. So that's what I would do absolutely before you get into the burger shacks or whatever of the world where you're $500,000 in debt and year 3 and you don't know even know how you got there. It's because you put your head in the sand, you didn't know your numbers. But the other end of that, because I don't want to be so negative, the other end of that is if you've got your projections, your simple 6-line projections, and you put them against your actuals, you could be knocking it out of the park. You could be seeing like, wow, this is a great model. And you can really double down on the marketing and sales because every time someone spends 10, 15, $20 with you, you know you're making money off that money. And then you've got a Chipotle, you've got a Cava, right? You've got something that's repeatable. That is absolutely how those places started. They put it one place, they got a model, that model printed money, and then they duplicate it. So there's something good that can come out of that as well, but you would never know that unless you come back to the original financial model to make sure it prints money.
So with all these things that could possibly go wrong and all
Mm,
the things kind of working against an entrepreneur, why do people open up restaurants? What is the draw of the restaurant world that those businesses seem to pop up a lot more, and they also have a higher closure rate than most businesses. But those are the ones that people have a romantic idea about of
yeah,
starting a business. Why do
they
people
sure
do it,
do.
knowing all the things that are working against you?
Well, I think for some people like me, I think it's a calling. I think it's a calling for some people. You can't not hear it and feel it, and then you just go with it. And hopefully you surround yourself with some smart people to make some money. I think others, and probably the majority or slight majority, do it because they just automatically assume they make money and they've never actually worked inside of a restaurant in any meaningful way. Because if you've worked in restaurants and not just showed up for your host shift once a week, I'm talking about worked in the restaurant and saw what went on behind the scenes and understood the money even a little bit, you would know that a typical restaurant does not make money. I don't care if they run a 45-minute wait at 5 p.m. on a Monday. It does not mean they're making money. It is difficult to make money in the restaurant industry. It can be done. I think I cracked a code on a way to almost make that permanent when people, follow the system of cash flow. But without that, I think it just looks glamorous. It looks like there's money from heaven falling in the door every time somebody comes in, but you don't realize that there is, for example, like a P&L, like an income statement of profit and loss. A typical business, it's like a 1 page, maybe 1.5 page, income, cost of goods, revenue. That's what you see. A restaurant, 3, 4, or 5 pages. There's a lot of moving parts, and you gotta control them all, and every one of them costs you money. So that's what I think what people don't realize.
Yeah, yeah. So it makes it look romantic. There's shows like The Bear and Top Chef. They all make it look romantic starting a restaurant, but there's some nitty-gritty dollars that you really have to keep track of, or it will control you. You aren't controlling it. And then the dream that you had romanticized in your head becomes a nightmare.
Yeah, they should
So
watch some Bar Rescue because
yeah.
I think that's more realistic. Some of the places he goes into, I used to love to binge watch that show. I'm like, "Yep, he's right. That's right."
It's Casey, I think this has been a great 101 episode for those listening that want to maybe think about dipping their toe in starting a restaurant or even being an entrepreneur. But if they want to learn more from you, where can people go? You wrote a book, so tell people about that. But where can people go online, social media, a website, to employ your consultation services?
Yeah, thank you so much. I'd love to be able to say that. So, my main company, the one I started after I sold my restaurants, is Spark Business Consulting. Spark is in Spark Plug, so Spark Business Consulting. Everything stems from there. So you can learn all about, who we are. So it's myself, a team of 10 employees. You could see the type of clients we work with. Like I said, I'd say about almost 50% are restaurants. And then the others are in construction and design and bridal, things like that. So you could see, what we do, who we work with, who we are. So much information. We update it all the time. Um, and then our services are on there definitely as well. And you can book a deep dive call with myself or one of my lead accountants, which we like jump on about a 45 to 60-minute call. We go through your numbers. We really dive deep into what's going on. Usually, sometimes you can just take that call and go with it, and you don't even need us beyond that. But if you do, we have a whole whole flurry of activity of services that we use from small, medium, and large. We do everything up to taxes. The other thing is Profit First for Restaurants is the book I wrote. So you can get to that website through Spark, or you could look up Profit First for Restaurants. You can get that anywhere books are sold. I also did the audio version, which a lot of people in the restaurant industry, I'm so glad I did that, love. I get that comment a lot. It is sold around the world right now, which is so amazing to even say, let alone see. So I get DMs on Instagram all the time of people who have picked up the book in Africa, in Australia, in Mexico, in
Wow.
Brazil, and just say how it had completely changed their lives. And I just love hearing that. So you can get Proper First Restaurants anywhere books are sold, on Audible, on Spotify. Um, and then lastly, well, you'll see on Spark, there's a lot of online courses that I've created if you're a do-it-yourself person. But I have a podcast just like you. It's not as fun as yours, but it could be. A lot of times it's mostly me talking. I just try and give like 15 to 20 minute like tidbits of advice, stuff that I would have wanted to know when I owned my restaurant, and that's called No Reservations. So you can get that wherever you find your podcasts.
Nice, nice. Thank you. So, if Carmi had you and your team on the other side of the table, they might have been able to turn a profit a little sooner than they had. But
Mhm.
Kasey, thank you so much for being on the pod. It was a great conversation, had a ton of fun. Go check out our website, sparkbusinessconsulting.com. Make sure to follow me on socials at Rich Herrera and at Eat Your Content. You will find nothing but food on there, nothing about numbers. uh,
That's
I,
probably a
I
good
am
thing.
I am horrible at math, so
That's why
I
we
don't.
have work.
I know. That's right. But thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. And thank you so much for all the great information.
My pleasure. Thanks, Rich.